Even though Nintendo is considered a major video game company, they are still relatively small in comparison to the likes of Microsoft and Sony, meaning they really have to strive for quality over quantity if they want to stay competitive. Unfortunately, not every single game they release is a smash hit, and Nintendo has definitely seen some rough years where a few more wrong mistakes could have ended everything for the company. I'm really interested to look at those peaks and valleys, which led me into wanting to create today's video about the best and worst selling game for every Nintendo franchise. Just a note, I'm going to be looking at units sold, as it would be impossible to calculate money differences due to factors like games pricing and inflation. Oh yeah, before I get started, my name is Copycat, and if you haven't yet, then please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to stay notified when I upload new videos. I don't think there was a question in anyone's mind that the Super Mario Bros. Series is the best performing out of every single Nintendo franchise, as it's really the company's flagship character, selling an estimated 758.6 million units worldwide. It's the very first entry on the NES that to this day is still the best selling at an astronomical 40.24 million units, which put Nintendo on the map as one of the main video game producers in the world. It's even crazier when you realize this number doesn't take into account Virtual Console remakes or ported versions, which would probably put it close to, if not make it the most played game of all time. On the worst selling side is surprisingly that original game sequel, that was only released in Japan on the Famicom due to Shigeru Miyamoto and Nintendo of America believing that it was too hard and that fact would cause it to fail in Western markets. This led it to only sell a measly 2.65 million units and caused Nintendo to reskin a game called Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic to be the American Super Mario Bros. 2 release on the NES in its place. As a bit of a subcategory in the Mario genre of games, I want to look at the sales specifically of his RPG entries, as they are radically different than the platforming titles deserving of their own part in this video. The best selling of these is Mario & Luigi, Bowser's Inside Story, that came out for the portable DS console in 2009. Its generally positive reviews is probably the reason for its good performance, receiving a 90 out of 100 on Metacritic, although that does only equal to 4.56 million copies, so it's not like this RPG was the company's most popular game by any means. On the flip side of things, the worst selling title from this set of games is the remake of that very game we just talked about, this time coming out on the 3DS with the added Bowser Jr.'s Journey game mode that was supposed to sweeten the deal even more. Even though it received pretty much the same praise as the previous version, this entry turned out to be Nintendo's biggest bomb since the Virtual Boy, only managing to sell around 35,000 copies in Japan, and Nintendo not even making the North American numbers available to the public. Poor sales were attributed to extremely subpar frame rates for a supposed upgraded game, the mind-numbingly boring added game mode, and the fact that an entire entry, Partners in Time, was skipped over during the remake process for some inexplicable reason. This terrible showing would unfortunately bankrupt the Mario & Luigi series developer, Alpha Dream, leading me to believe that we won't see another game with these two brothers' names in the title ever again. Up next is my all-time favorite series in The Legend of Zelda, that's managed to sell around 128 million units as a franchise, spanning since the NES era to present day. It actually surprised me to learn that Breath of the Wild is the best-selling game with a total of 22.28 million units and counting being shipped out worldwide. Now, of course, this game is a masterpiece, but the fact that it's so new would have made me think that titles like the original NES entry, at 6.5 million, or the extraordinarily popular Ocarina of Time, at 7.6 million, would have topped it, but they don't even come anywhere close. I think the Switch's immense popularity, plus the fact that it was a launch title alongside the system, and also popped up on the older Wii U, helped its cause greatly, but the fact that it's actually a good game also does count towards this. The pandemic was also a factor that definitely helped its sales dramatically, as everyone was stuck inside and more people bought a Nintendo Switch due to its vast library of fun games. Now, the worst selling in the Zelda series is one I even thought was a strange game when it first came out, in the Four Swords Adventures for the GameCube, that only managed to shill out 940,000 copies. I remember my friends and I at the time absolutely detesting this game, as it felt like a huge step backwards from Wind Waker, and was not as engaging to play together unlike Super Smash Bros. And Mario Kart. Many critics did give it pretty positive reviews, but also said it looked more like its Game Boy Advance counterpart, which is probably the case, as many aspects were ported from that version to this one. Even worse is that the only way to play multiplayer is with a link cable and your own Game Boy Advance system, using it as a controller and your own screen when you decide to venture off on your own. This made playing the game even more difficult, and definitely limited the potential of its playability, as not everyone owned a Game Boy Advance. One franchise I'm surprised hasn't had better sales during its long history is Metroid, where the most popular game is the GameCube Metroid Prime entry, managing to ship out just over 2.8 million units. In comparison to Mario and Zelda, this number is relatively low, probably due to not only the more violent shoot-'em-up nature of the series, but also because it's generally a much tougher play that just isn't for everyone. Of course, this is a much older release game, and as players have grown up, they are now more willing to play these types of entries, which is why it looks like the newest Metroid Dread is completely going to break the sales record, and I'm going to assume that if Metroid Prime 4 ever comes out, then it's going to shatter it. Now, the worst selling game in the series is Metroid Prime Federation Force for the 3DS, that only managed to sell an appallingly low 150,000 copies. Negative reviews and fan hatred for this entry are definitely the reasons for its utter failure, as many criticize it of being devoid of traditional Metroid elements. These are things like the game being geared towards a first-person combat experience and not exploration, lack of single-player game modes, and the exclusion of the main character herself, Samus Aran. When the game was shown at E3 2015, it immediately received backlash, where its YouTube announcement trailer garnered 25,000 dislikes to 2,500 likes within its first day, as fans who had been waiting a decade for a new Metroid game received a spin-off title that they didn't want instead. Up next, we're going to look at the Donkey Kong franchise, and even though it is technically one of Nintendo's original series, he didn't make his true home debut until Donkey Kong Country for the SNES, which is also his highest selling game. Shipping out over 9.3 million copies, this title was highly praised by both fans and critics due to its state-of-the-art graphical capabilities, fun music, and addictive gameplay that gave people another platforming option rather than the same old Mario formula. I'm surprised to hear that nowadays this game garners some mixed reactions from fans, as I've always had this immense fun when I play this SNES trilogy of games, honestly never getting tired of DK's world. The worst selling game in the franchise is one that I had somehow never heard about before in DK King of the Swing, that was developed by a company called Payon and was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2005. This strange combination of puzzling and platforming was pretty well accepted by critics, as they said it was both familiar and unique at the same time, but that the graphics were a huge step back from the usual 3D country feel. In the end, only 280,000 copies were sold, which is really not great in the grand scheme of things, and probably shouldn't have spawned a sequel, but oddly it did. One franchise that's all over the place in terms of sales is Fire Emblem, which is only the case as early entries were released as Japanese exclusive titles, but over time grew more popular with Western audiences. A huge reason behind this growth has to do with the inclusion of many of the series' characters in the Super Smash Bros. Melee game, that led to fan interest in this JRPG simulation-based franchise, and to the release of the Blazing Blade for the Game Boy Advance, which is the first for Western audiences. The best-selling is the newest Nintendo Switch 3 Houses entry at around 3.02 million copies, really showing how far its popularity has reached, and has definitely influenced Nintendo to westernize many other regional exclusive JRPGs. Now, the worst selling is one of those titles that never saw the light of day outside of Japan, in Fire Emblem Thracia 776, that only managed to sell 158,000 copies for the Super Famicom in 1999. This terrible number can directly be associated with it being released on a system that was already out of date at the time, as the newer N64 had already been out for 3 years at that point. What also didn't help was that critics found the entry much harder and more confusing than past games in the series, which caused casual gamers to stay away and not buy it. Even though there's been over 30 unique titles in the Kirby franchise spanning over 3 decades, the series as a whole has only sold around 35.46 million copies, which is definitely considered to be on the lower end of things. The highest selling is its original entry on the Game Boy in Kirby's Dream Land, which did manage to shell out a respectable 5.13 million copies, even though it didn't receive incredibly great reviews, only getting a 62% on game rankings. Fans, however, love the simplistic, easy to control, but overall fun gameplay that offered a friendly challenge for people of all ages to enjoy. I also think its very cutesy art style helped its performance as well, as kids probably saw this game on the store shelves and begged their parents to buy it for them. The worst selling game in the franchise is one I had actually never heard about, in Kirby's Block Ball, also for that original Game Boy, that only sold an incredibly low 64,000 copies in Japan. This game did get pretty favorable reviews, but it was noted to essentially be an Arachnoid or Breakout clone, skinned over with Kirby franchise characters, which must have turned many players away due to this gimmicky nature. In all honesty, I've played types of these Brick Breaker games many times in my life, and I don't need a reskinned version of it to enjoy it more or less. Up next, we're going to look at the franchise of Mario's opposite and nemesis, Wario, who has gone through a transition over the years, starting as a goofy platformer and evolving to a fun, minigame-oriented series. The best selling of all of them is the first title he shows up in as the main character, in Wario Land, Super Mario Land 3 for the Game Boy, shipping out around 5.19 million copies. Little is known to why Nintendo shifted this Game Boy miniseries to focus on Wario instead of Mario, but its name and association alone definitely bolstered this title to reach this point. It is a fun game regardless of who's the star, offering a very similar experience to the past Mario games, while also incorporating brand new original elements that had never been seen before. The game that makes the worst selling portion of this video is also one of the lowest performing worldwide releases you'll see in Nintendo's entire library in Game & Wario, that came out for the Wii U in 2013. Only being able to sell an absurdly low 250,000 copies, many reviewers stated that there was a very sparse collection of minigames to be found. Plus, there were only a few exceptional ones in the bunch, with the rest being an uninspired mess. Also, the failure of the Wii U as a system definitely didn't help this title's cause, as only 13.5 million people own the console, so sales of any game for it would automatically be on the lower end. Next up, we're going to look at Nintendo's second most popular franchise in Pokemon, which over the years has garnered 380 million copies sold across its vast library of titles. The best selling of them all is the first generation's red, blue, green, and yellow set of games that managed to sell 72.76 million copies, including its ports, remakes, and virtual console versions. Now, I do get that technically these numbers are skewed, as there are 4 games here that are being counted as one entry, but it at least shows the popularity of these games where people were willing to buy multiple copies of the same experience just to play and capture different types of Pokemon. Now, way on the opposite end of the spectrum is probably the most embarrassing entry we'll see in this video, in Pokemon Rumble U for the Wii U, only managing to sell 11,000 copies in total. 11,000. Receiving mostly negative reviews, many critics stated that the gameplay was way too linear and repetitive, while not containing any strategy elements that you'd usually see in the series' main games. On top of that, Nintendo really pushed their own NFC Pokemon figurines that worked in conjunction with the game, which to many people like myself comes across as a money grab. For years, I've always felt like there are too many Pokemon spin-off titles, and this one sort of gets lost in the huge library of unfun games. One franchise that hasn't quite reached a high level of popularity is the rail shoot-'em-up Star Fox series, where the best-selling title is its fantastic N64 entry that was able to hit the 4 million copy mark. This really is still the quintessential game in the series that greatly built on the pillars that the original SNES title established, containing state-of-the-art graphics and a game style that really had never been seen before. Unfortunately, the series could never quite reach the same level of quality in their latest entries, with the newest Star Fox Zero for the Wii U being the worst, only being able to sell an almost embarrassing 440,000 copies. There is some fun to be found in this reimagining of the Star Fox universe, it's just that the mechanics at times can be a bit puzzling, where you need to use the Wii U's gamepad in conjunction with your TV screen, which quickly becomes a headache. The Wii U's unpopularity was an obvious barrier as well. It's just that this game wasn't well received by fans or critics, which was the real nail in the coffin. I'm not really too surprised to find out that the highest selling game in the Animal Crossing franchise is the newest New Horizons entry for the Switch, as it really did come out at a perfect time where people were stuck inside due to the global pandemic. This led to 33.89 million copies being bought in a very short amount of time, as this title combines pretty much every great aspect from the past entries in the series and packages it nicely on your own little island. New Horizons really kept me entertained during the most boring times of the lockdown, and even though it's a game type I usually wouldn't be interested in playing, there's just something addicting about making and spending money in real life and in this fake game world. On the flip side, I'm also not surprised to see that the series' first entry, Animal Forest, is the lowest selling, as it was the least available game in the franchise. That's because it only came out in Japan on the N64 DD add-on that itself was an utter failure, leading to only 210,000 copies being sold. Of course, this would eventually get a remake / port of sorts for the GameCube, getting renamed to Animal Crossing. It's just interesting to see this alternate version full of Japanese nuances that had to be altered extensively to make sense in Western markets. In terms of Nintendo multiplayer experiences, Mario Kart is by far the best selling, with its Wii entry getting out around 37.38 million units, followed closely by Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with 37.08 million units sold. This very high number for the Wii version has to do with it being the highest selling Nintendo console of all time, with over 100 million systems being bought, meaning it's no question that people would also buy this Mario Kart game. I do think Mario Kart 8 Deluxe will beat out this game very soon, as it really is the most superior experience, but it technically is a remake, so it's hard to fully count it. On the low-end scale side, that honor goes to Mario Kart Super Circuit for the Game Boy Advance, garnering only 5.9 million copies in sales, which is a bit surprising to me as the portable system itself sold over 80 million units. Its poor performance is a bit puzzling, as it received very good reviews and overall was a generally fun game to play. It was just something about the Game Boy Advance system that turned people off from purchasing games. Believe it or not, this number still puts it at the 4th best-selling game on the system, and the best-selling non-Pokemon game, which sort of baffles me. I guess I do remember being disappointed in the GBA's lineup of games that really only focus on ports or past experiences, and I think this hampered game sales as people bought the system but quickly became disinterested. One franchise that's become a Nintendo multiplayer staple is Mario Party, where the best selling is the Switch's Super Mario Party that's been able to ship out 15.72 million copies so far. If you haven't guessed or noticed, Switch games show up towards the top of most of these sales lists, as lately most of these titles are ones that are fun to play with the entire family, which is a must-have during a pandemic. Even though it received only decent reviews and requires Joy-Cons for each player to play together, it far exceeded Nintendo's expectations and sort of revitalized the series. The worst selling game in this party series was Mario Party Top 100 for the 3DS, which only managed to shell out 670,000 copies. In all fairness, this did come out extremely late in the 3DS's lifespan, at a point where most fans would have just preferred it to come out on the Switch, so they could more easily enjoy this definitive collection with their family and friends. The fact that this is the lowest selling game in the franchise does prove that over the years it has performed pretty well, and I think this game's spiritual remake for the Switch, Mario Party Superstars, will be a great selling game as well. The final franchise we're going to look at in this video is Nintendo's Ensemble Fighting Super Smash Bros. Series. That's always a must-buy in terms of multiplayer experiences, never failing to produce a fun time. The best selling of this series is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for the Switch at 24.77 million copies, which really is the definitive version containing the franchise's best mechanics and most characters, with constant tweaks and changes to maintain the quality of play. I know that most professional Smash players still prefer the feel of the GameCube's Melee entry. I just think that for general enjoyment, Ultimate gives you the best value, as there are over 82 fighters to choose from and master, so you'll never get a dull moment. Now, the worst selling came to me as no surprise in Super Smash Bros. For the Wii U and 3DS, only managing to get out 5.38 million copies combined. For a game that came out with two separate versions for two separate systems at one time, this number is startlingly low, but once again, the failure of the Wii U is solely to blame for this mishap. I actually enjoyed being able to play the mobile 3DS version and never once felt like it diminished the value or mechanics of your experience. It's just that during the specific moment in time, Nintendo was really struggling to maintain their fan base, and this led to many amazing titles that get seemingly looked over. Alright, that's gonna be it for today's video, guys. I really hope you did enjoy this one. If you did, please leave a like, comment below what you thought about it, and of course subscribe to my channel. Also, I do have an Instagram at Copycat Gamer, so go give that a follow. There I upload some cool clips and items from my collection that you won't see anywhere else. Hope you guys all have a good day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!